lighting up the darkness. Every day, curiouser and curiouser. But let us start by saying Hodesh Tov. We wish you a beautiful Rosh Hodesh. Rosh Hodesh means the head of the month. Today is the first day of the month of Nisan, the month of miracles. Nisan is an important month, one of the most important in the Jewish calendar because it includes Passover, which is coming in 2 weeks. The name of the month itself, Nisan, has the word Nes in it, which means miracle. This is the month of miracles. This is the month in which we were redeemed from Egypt 3,300 years ago. And many believe this is the month that will be redeemed in the modern age, meaning the Mashiach will come. We'll all enter an age that is unbelievable, incredible miracles every day. Peace and war will be gone. Disease and famine gone from this world. May it be soon. We're living in such extraordinary times. Who knows? This could be the year. This could be the year of the redemption. And if so, then its seeds are in today, this day, the head of the month. Observing that this day would be the first of the month was the first commandment the Jewish people received while we were still in Egypt. The first commandment we received as a people. This shall be the head of months for you. Thank you, grocery workers. Please type it in the comments. Thank you, grocery workers. Thank you, grocery workers. You know, before all this began, we might not have thought that people working in a grocery store would be like soldiers on a battlefield, serving in the front lines. But thank you for your service. Everybody who works in a grocery store, they don't have the luxury of staying home. I mean, it's not such a luxury. We're quarantining ourselves. We're locking ourselves away, staying home to slow or stop the spread of this plague. We must stay home, my friends. This is something to take seriously. We're getting all kinds of reports from people working in emergency rooms. You know, most of us are just not experiencing it. We're not seeing it. But if you're in an emergency room, and granted, it's only the people in the worst shape, people who are so sick they need to go to an emergency room, of course, that's a small percentage of the population. But there's enough of those people that they're in those emergency rooms, they're very sick, and some are even dying. God forbid. Please, God, strengthen their families, comfort their families, and strengthen the doctors who can heal these people. God willing, such people who are in the emergency rooms will get healed, will recover, and come home. So all of us should be staying home. But the grocery workers can't stay home. They must work so that the rest of us can eat. So we thank you for your service. Everyone who works in a grocery store, a supermarket, the baggers, the checkers, the people stocking all the shelves, thank you for your service. Thank you for keeping the food in the stores so that we can come in and buy it and exercise safe practices when we do. We shared a video today on the page on Accidental Talmudist as a public service. It's a medical worker explaining how you should shop and how you should bring the groceries into your home. We thought we were using safe practices. We realized we didn't know enough. So watch the video, get educated. It's not easy these days to really be proper when you bring groceries in. You need to rinse everything off, throw away all the packaging, etc. There's a video on our page that explains how that's done. Yes, I see people sharing in the comments. Thank you, grocery workers in Indianapolis, says Cheryl Strack. Please, everybody, in those comments, thank the grocery workers of your town. It's important. We've got to express our gratitude. Let us get to our page. If you saw the video this morning, by the way, that was a surprise. Usually on Rosh Hodesh, the first of the month, we try to share the musical Hallow from Mayan Yisrael, where I like to attend for musical Hallows, and Moshe Storch, who leads us in the singing. Of course, we can't pray together in our synagogues right now. I still thought I would be live streaming Moshe's song. There was a glitch. It didn't work. So I went live and I read the Psalms of Hallow that we say at this time on the beginning of the month. It's basically Psalms 113 through 118. I did it my way with a little oomph, a little vigor. And in English, it was the first time we'd ever done that. It was a spontaneous thing. It was unexpected, but it went over really well. So if you enjoyed that, let me know. And maybe we'll try to do that next month as well. Most of us, our Hebrew isn't good enough that even if we love the music, we don't really know what we're saying when we hear or recite the Psalms in Hebrew. So sometimes it's good to say it in our own language so that we can get closer to God with meaning, right? It's not just a recital, it's from our hearts. So if you'd like to see that, check it out. It's on the page. It's called Psalms of Hallow. In an AT way, sharing the Psalms of Hallow with you. That was a live broadcast this morning. All right. Here on AT Daily, we are making our way through the Talmud, one page at a time. We are holding by Tractate Shabbos, page 21. That means we're in chapter 2, and we're exploring the first Mishnah of chapter 2. It's a famous Mishnah. We see it in every Jewish prayer book on Friday nights. With what may we light, and with what may we not light the Shabbos lamp? And we're exploring materials that are permitted and prohibited for use as the wick in a Shabbos lamp. Recall that in the ancient world, the lights of Shabbos didn't look like a candle. This is actually a Shabbos candle. But in any candle, somebody asked this and I looked it up, any candle can be used as a Shabbos candle because modern candles burn steadily like this. And that's really what's going on as we look at what materials may be used for the wick or for the oil in the ancient world, right, where they didn't have candles per se, but they had a lamp with oil in it and a wick stuck in that oil. And the idea was you wouldn't use something that was in itself dirty or disgusting because that would disrespect Shabbat. And more importantly, and more relevantly, let's say, because people wouldn't tend to do that, but what they might do is use a material that burns, but doesn't burn steadily enough, right? You see this flame, it's nice, it doesn't sputter. It may wave a little bit in the slight breezes of this office, but it doesn't sputter because it's steady. The material of the candle goes up through the wick in a steady way. But some materials would not transmit the oil in a steady fashion, so they're not suitable to be the wick. And some oils will not rise through a wick in a steady fashion, and so they're not suitable to be oil for the Shabbos lamp. And that's really what's important, that it should produce a nice steady flame. Why? Not just because it's pretty, but because if it sputters, we might come to adjust it on Shabbat. And that would be a violation of Shabbos because we don't kindle a fire on Shabbat. And if we move the candle, if we move the fire, we might come to kindle a part of it that wasn't kindled before, or we might come to extinguish, which is also a forbidden labor on Shabbos. Okay. So today on Shabbos 21, we have a question examined. Can some of these materials that are prohibited to become a wick in themselves, can they be mixed with a permitted material to form a wick? And there's of course, believe it or not, there's a machloket, there's a dispute, there's going to be an argument about that. And what we see is that who was it? So Rabbah explained that what we want is a wick that burns steadily, right? And then they said that that we may not mix, right? The point is that we may not mix these materials, right? It is not permitted to mix prohibited materials with permitted materials in creating a wick for the Shabbos lamp. But Abaya raised an objection. He said that Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, who was the Nasi, the head of the Sanhedrin, he taught that in his house, he learned from his father that they would wrap the wick in the Shabbos lamp. So remember, the lamp it's like a puddle of oil, right? And the wick is stuck on that. And then the wick maybe sticks out the end and burns there. And oil comes up the wick and keeps that wick burning. And he says that in his father's house, they would take the wick and they would tie it around a nut, right? Like an almond or something, or a walnut, whatever the kind of nut was. So there's two materials mixed together to form the wick, and a nut is not one of the permitted materials to form the wick of the Shabbos lamp. And so our sages explain what was going on here is not that in Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel's house they were mixing a prohibited substance with a permitted substance in order to form a wick for the Shabbos lamp, but rather the reason that they wrapped the wick around the nut was so that the wick would float on top of the oil. The nut was being used as a flotation device for the wick. And so we learn from that if you're using the non-permitted substance simply to make the wick float or to stiffen the wick, that's permitted. But if you're trying to make a compound wick out of a permitted and a prohibited substance so that it will burn in a certain way, or so you don't have quite enough material so it'll burn longer, for example, or somehow it'll burn brighter, so that's prohibited. You can't bring in the prohibited substance for its use in a wick as a wick, but for the alternative purpose of helping the wick float on top of the oil, or just to stiffen the wick, not to create light, but just to stiffen it, that was permitted. From there, we are going to start to digress, and we're going to make our way toward Hanukkah. So the way we start this digression is we've been talking about permitted oils and permitted wicks in the Shabbos lamp. So then the question is asked, what about the oil lamps, because they were oil lamps, in the menorah, or the candelabrum in English, of the Holy Temple in Jerusalem, right? So you'll recall, and now it's the symbol of Israel, right? It's one of the symbols of Israel. It's the menorah from the temple. The menorah from the temple has a center cup and then 3 cups on either side of it, right? Which are the same, this thing is backwards, which are at the same height as the center cups. So it has 7 cups straight across. The priests would light that lamp every morning. It was meant to be kept burning all the time. And that, when we get to the Hanukkah story in a few minutes, right, that's what they ran out of sanctified, pure oil to put in the temple menorah, and then the miracle of Hanukkah would ensue. So in the menorah, in the temple, which had 7 cups, the question is, can you use oil and wick that is prohibited in the Shabbos lamp? Could it be used in the menorah in the temple? So, who said no? Sorry, different. Who was it that said no, you cannot? No, Rav Huna said, I'm sorry, I don't have the name of the sage handy. So the first opinion was, well, I'm sorry, this is what it is. We're going to get to Hanukkah, and there's a dispute. Regarding the lights of the temple, the oil and the materials that are prohibited to be used in a wick or in the oil of the Shabbos lamp are also prohibited to be used in the lights of the temple. Now, this is a little bit surprising, because this decree that these substances cannot be used for the Shabbos light is a rabbinic decree, right? It's not in the Torah. The rabbi said that these materials cannot be used. Why? Because if we use them, we may come to violate the prohibition of kindling or extinguishing on Shabbos. But we learned yesterday that there are no rabbinic decrees in the temple. In the temple, the priests are trusted to know the laws properly. They don't need a fence around the Torah. And there's so many specific laws in the Torah about what the priests are supposed to do in the temple courtyard, with the sacrifices, with lighting the lights, etc., that they don't need additional rabbinic decrees. So how is it that this rabbinic decree of these particular substances which are prohibited for the wick or for the oil in the Shabbos lamp are also going to apply to the temple menorah, which is lit every day? And the answer is because there's a Torah commandment regarding the menorah that must be lit every day in the temple. There's not a Torah commandment that we light Shabbos lamps, right? The mitzvah, the commandment to light the Shabbos lamps, doesn't come from the Torah. It comes from a combination of scripture in Isaiah, which says, you shall call Shabbat a delight, and the Torah law, you shall not kindle a light. Since you cannot kindle, but you must enjoy Shabbat, the sages decreed that you have to have a Shabbat lamp burning, right? You have to light the Shabbos lamp before Shabbat begins. But in the temple, the Torah says you must light this every day. It will be a continual flame in the temple. And from this we learn out that the lights in the temple, they need to be lit until they ascend by themselves. That's from Exodus 27, right? They need to be lit until they ascend by themselves. I can't remember right now, but that's like the first line of one of the parshas where this is explained. So what does it mean that we light? And metaphorically, by the way, this means that people who are involved in kiruv work, like Chabad rabbis, right, who are bringing Judaism to the Jews who, for whatever reason, have become disconnected from Judaism, they want to bring that light to them until the light ascends by themselves, right? Teach them enough until people can learn on their own. Teach them enough until people can practice on their own. But that teaching comes from this idea that the lamp in the temple has to be lit until its flame ascends on its own. In other words, it doesn't sputter, right? So the reason that they couldn't use these sort of bad wicks or bad oils in the temple is for the same reason that it would cause sputtering. And then they would be violating the Torah commandment to keep this light burning continually in the holy temple. Once we're on the subject of the menorah in the temple, we're going to continue our digression and get into Hanukkah. By the way, most people will call the lights of Hanukkah, what we light them on, a menorah. And that actually is the right terminology. It is a menorah. But note that a Hanukkah menorah, maybe Nina, if you're watching, you could bring one in here. But a Hanukkah menorah is not the same as the menorah, the large menorah that stood in the courtyard of the Holy Temple. Why? Because a Hanukkah menorah commemorates an 8-day miracle. And so a Hanukkah menorah has 4 branches on each side of the center, and not at the same height, but rather the one in the center is higher because the one in the center is not one of the lights of Hanukkah. The one in the center is a utility. It's used to light the Hanukkah lights. But there are 8 Hanukkah lights to commemorate the 8 days of Hanukkah, or at least 8 cups in a Hanukkah menorah, whereas the menorah in the temple, right, had 3 lights on each side of the center and at the same height, because there's 7 lights and they're all the same height, same importance. Okay? Just note that. And so some people will refer to a Hanukkah menorah as a Chanukiah, right? When you hear the word Chanukiah, it means a Hanukkah menorah, and it's distinguishing it from the menorah in the temple. Okay. So Rav Huna said, this is the dispute I was thinking about earlier, Rav Huna said that the wicks and the oils, which are prohibited to be used in the Shabbos lamp, are also prohibited to be used in the Hanukkah menorah. Right? His thinking is, if it's not good enough for Shabbos, right, which is an important light, so let's not use it for the Hanukkah menorah. But the law does not follow Rav Huna in this. Rabbi Zera said in the name of Rav that oils and wicks that are no good for the Shabbos lamp are permitted for the Hanukkah menorah. Why? Because these 2 mitzvahs have different laws associated with them. Recall that the Shabbos lamp, its purpose is to give us light during Shabbat so that we don't sit in the dark. We benefit from the light of the Shabbos lamp. We use the light of the Shabbos lamp. Because we use that light, it's very possible that if it's sputtering without thinking about it, we'll come to adjust it, right? Because we want that light to be steady. Why? Because we're eating by it or we're reading by it. We're using it as the light source in our homes during what would otherwise be a dark time. The Hanukkah menorah, its lights commemorate a miracle that happened in our history. And we'll get to that in a moment if you're not familiar with the Hanukkah story. But it commemorates a miracle that happened for the Jewish people during the Hasmonean dynasty in the Second Temple period. And as such, its purpose is only to commemorate the miracle, and we cannot benefit from the light of the Hanukkah menorah. We cannot read a book by the light of the Hanukkah menorah. We cannot sit in a room that would be dark otherwise and use that light from the Hanukkah menorah to sort of conduct our affairs in that room, right? If we turn off the lights because we want to watch it, that's fine. The purpose of the Hanukkah menorah is to commemorate the miracle, and it's nice to look at and meditate on the great love that God had for the Jewish people, has for the Jewish people, and had for the Jewish people, and how he saved us from our oppressors in that time, in this season, when we're in Hanukkah, right? And so because we don't make use of the Hanukkah light, and we're not required to relight it if it goes out, there is no reason to come and adjust the light if it sputters. We don't need to relight it. We don't make use of it. So if it sputters, it sputters. And for that reason, we're allowed to use these materials, which are not good. They don't produce a steady enough flame for the Shabbos lamp, but are permitted to be used in the Hanukkah lamp, in the Hanukkah menorah. Why are we not permitted to make use of the light of the Hanukkah menorah? Why is that? Why are we not permitted to make use of it? We understand that we're commemorating the miracle, and we're lighting the Hanukkah lights at that time to commemorate that a miracle was performed for us. But once the Hanukkah light is lit, why is it that we cannot make use of that light, which is now, let's say, in our dwelling? 3 reasons are given. Our sages disagree about the reasoning, right, that we can't use the light. But 3 reasons are given. One is deference to the mitzvah, right? It's basically what I was saying. It's an important mitzvah. It's a commandment to remember the miracle and to publicize the miracle, right? They would say we remember that God saved us, and we want everyone to know that God saved us. We want to remind ourselves and everybody around us that God saved us at that time and that we love God and we're grateful to God. So if we use such a light, to cook by or to read by or to count money by or anything like that, so then it would be like disrespecting the mitzvah. The second reason is given by Rashi, and he says that we're not allowed to make use of the lights of the Hanukkah lamp to distinguish the lights of the Hanukkah menorah from all other lights, right? They're special lights. The lights themselves are special, right? They represent a miracle, and we're attracted to them, and we love those lights, and we don't want them to be like other lights in our lives. And the third reason is because actually in the temple, the menorah that stood in the temple, the 7-branched menorah that stood in the temple, it also served a holy purpose, that sort of to shine God's light out into the world for the benefit of all people, not just the Jews. The holy temple was understood to be the axis mundi, right? The place where heaven and earth met, and sacrifices were brought there on behalf of the whole human race by the Jews, but for all humans. And that light from the temple menorah was sort of shining forth to the whole world. And so priests were not allowed to make use of that light for their own purposes, right? While they were serving in the temple, they couldn't go, at night when they were bored and they want to read a book or a scroll, let's say, and they couldn't sit next to the temple menorah and use that light in order, to read their book, to make use of it. That light was a holy light, like the Hanukkah light, right? A Shabbos light, it's very special. It's very special when we light the Shabbos lights, but that light itself is not holy. It's a utilitarian light, so we're not sitting in the dark. The Shabbos light, like the temple light, was holy in itself, is holy in itself. Now, this idea that you are not permitted, that the oils and wicks that are not permitted for Shabbos lamps are permitted for the Hanukkah menorah, that halacha was not known to Abaya, in his time. So he was a sage residing, a very important sage, residing in Babylonia, right, in Babel. So that particular decree of the rabbis was not known to him. It was taught to him in the name, the sages presented that halacha in front of Abaya in the name of Rabbi Yirmiyah. I'm not sure how to say it correctly. Yirmiyah probably. Yirmiyah. And Abaya did not accept that halacha. So remember, the rabbis of the Mishnah, the rabbis of the Talmud, like they were figuring out all these laws. And during their lives, some of these laws hadn't been settled yet. They're settled for us, but they were arguing about it, right? So this particular decree, rabbinic decree, by the time it got to him, it came in the name of a guy named Rabbi Yirmiyah, and Abaya did not accept it. Why? Because for whatever reason, he did not hold by laws promulgated by Rabbi Yirmiyah. They had something between them. He didn't respect Rabbi Yirmiyah. Later, years later, that halacha, that law, was presented again to Rabbi Abaya, to Abaya in Babel, but this time it was brought to him by Ravin, another sage who brought it from Israel in the west to the sages in Babylonia in the east, right? Even though Israel's, sort of more important for the Jewish people than Babylonia, at this time there was a lot of Roman persecution, and there was actually more learning going on in Babylonia than in the Holy Land because so much of the teaching and learning was being suppressed in the Holy Land. Nonetheless, Ravin brought this teaching and it was presented in front of Abaya, this time in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. Now, Rabbi Yochanan was somebody that Abaya respected deeply. And at that point, he accepted that halacha, that law, upon himself. And he commented, I want to get this, had I merited, I would have learned this halacha from the outset, right? He said, if I had merited, right? If I had enough merit before heaven, right? If I had been a good enough person to have that much merit before heaven, then I would have learned this halacha at the outset, the first time it was presented to me. So the question is asked, well, now you've accepted it. What difference does it make if you learned it, earlier or later? The important thing is that you've learned it now. And the reason that he wished that he had learned it earlier, the practical difference between learning something late in life or early in life, is with regard to knowledge acquired in one's youth, which is better remembered. It's better remembered. This is a teaching we'll encounter elsewhere in the Talmud, and this idea that the Torah we learn when we are young is like words written on a clean blackboard, right? Or words written on a clean sheet of paper. And the things we learn when we're older, it's like words written on a blackboard that's been, written on and erased many times, and there's lots of, eraser marks and chalk marks all over it, or a sheet of paper that's, people have written on a pencil and erased it and written and penciled and erased, so it's a messy piece of paper. It's hard to distinguish clearly the new writing on it because so many things have been written and erased on it before. It's not to be discouraging. I'm 54 years old. I'm learning every day. But I do wish a lot of these things I'd learned when I was young, because if you think about things that you learned when you were really young, a joke you heard, a song you learned, something you learned in class one day that it's like not even important knowledge, but it's in there. And as we get older, it's so much harder to get knowledge in there and to have it hold, right? So that's why it's a good encouragement, if we're parents or if we're grandparents, to really make it possible for the young people to learn what they need to learn, what's important in life, to get those lessons when they're young. And another post I shared today was encouraging our elders, it's like a note from a 23-year-old saying, when you were 23, what do you wish you knew, right? I'm 23 years old. Dear elders, if you could teach one thing to yourself when you were 23, what would it be? And I think we've already got like 100 answers on that post. Take a look, that's on the page at Accidental Talmudist. But this idea of giving wisdom to the young while they're young. And young people don't want to hear it. I know. I have kids. They don't want to hear it from us. But if you're young, oh man, open your eyes and open your ears and learn from your elders. And if you're an elder trying to get knowledge and wisdom into the young, one thing I've noticed is that even though our kids, say they're bored and they don't want to keep hearing it from us, they hear it. They hear it. So keep repeating those lessons, even if they look bored, because things do sink in at a level when people are young, which can't be matched later. Let us proceed. We're still talking about Hanukkah. And now we get to a very famous teaching about, well, since we're talking about Hanukkah and what wicks and oils we may use in the Hanukkah menorah, so now our sages explain a little bit, well, what is the mitzvah of Hanukkah? And how do we fulfill the mitzvah of Hanukkah, right? So they do two things. This is page 21b in Tractate Shabbos. This is actually the home address in the Talmud for the observance of Hanukkah. If you want to know anything about Hanukkah from the Talmud, it's here. There's not a tractate on Hanukkah. It's done in Shabbos. It's done here on page 21b. So they do two things. I'm going to do the second one first. They give the historical account, it's quite brief, of why we observe Hanukkah. And then they say, how we observe it in the home, right? So first, I'll take it a little bit out of order and do the historical story, right? In case you don't know the story of Hanukkah, the background is there was a war, right, that the Syrian Greeks tried to eliminate Jewish observance from the Holy Land. Judah and the Maccabees rose up against them, and we actually won against incredible odds this guerrilla war, and we kicked this Greek influence out of the Holy Land. And after that war was over, that's where we pick this up. The Gemara asks, what is Hanukkah and why are lights kindled on Hanukkah? The Gemara answers, the sages taught in Megillat Tanis, on the 25th of Kislev, the days of Hanukkah are 8. One may not eulogize on them, and one may not fast on them. What is the reason? When the Greeks entered the sanctuary, they defiled all the oils that were in the sanctuary by touching them. Amazing time to be reading that. They defiled all the oils that were in the sanctuary by touching them. And when the Hasmonean monarchy overcame them and emerged victorious over them, they searched and found only one cruse of oil that was placed with the seal of the high priest, undisturbed by the Greeks. And there was sufficient oil there to light the menorah for only one day. A miracle occurred, and they lit the menorah from it for 8 days. The next year, the sages instituted those days and made them holidays with recitation of Hallow and special thanksgiving in prayer and blessings. One thing to note in passing is really the miracle. Really the miracle was that the many were delivered into the hands of the few. We had no business winning that war. We were up against incredible odds. They never should have fought that war, right? Why did they make such a little deal out of the fact that a huge army was delivered into the hands of a little band of guerrilla soldiers? Why? Because at the time that our sages are setting down these Gemaras, this commentary on the Mishnah in the Talmud, the Bar Kokhba rebellion had happened. A disastrous rebellion against the Roman Empire. And our sages did not want to encourage any kind of armed uprising because it was such a disaster for the Jewish people. And that's why they focus much more on this more mystical miracle of the oil lasting for 8 days. That's in passing. Now, how do we observe Hanukkah? We're all familiar, right, with either we're Jewish and we've done it ourselves, or we've seen the symbology all over American culture. It's so beautiful that Jews are so accepted in America and throughout the world that even all the non-Jews have seen a Hanukkah menorah, right, with the 8 lights, 8 cups for candles on, all on one level, and one a little bit higher, either in the middle or off to the side, that's used for lighting the other ones. Those Hanukkah menorahs are in use and are popular and are identified not only with Hanukkah, but are identified, it's one of the symbols of the Jewish people, but they are not the original or the only way to observe Hanukkah. In fact, to be lighting, 1 candle on the first night and 2 candles on the second night and 3 candles on the third night, that was the extreme zealous way to observe Hanukkah, right? The sages taught the basic mitzvah of Hanukkah is each day to have a light kindled by one person, the head of the household, for himself and his household, right? So you actually fulfill the obligation to observe Hanukkah, to light the Hanukkah light, simply by lighting 1 candle for the whole household each night. And the mehadrin, i.e., those who are meticulous in the performance of commandments, right? Those who are meticulous, known as the mehadrin. Those who are meticulous in the performance of the mitzvahs kindle 1 light for each and every person in the household, right? So if you're like a really religious Jew, and let's say you have a family of 4, let's say there's 2 parents and 2 kids, so then the head of the household or the other people can help him, they would be lighting 1 candle for each person. That's 4 candles each night, right? So each night they would light 4 candles on every night of Hanukkah. And the mehadrin min mehadrin, the mehadrin min ha-mehadrin, the most meticulous of the meticulous Jews, right? The most zealous, the most religious. This is like the extreme religious position, right? Who are even more meticulous, adjust the number of lights daily. That there would be a different number of lights each night. And then there were 2 systems to do it. One view, which was the view of Beis Shammai, was that you would start with 8 candles on the first night because there's 8 nights remaining of Hanukkah. And then on the second night, you would light 7 because there's 7 nights remaining. And then 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So you would diminish by 1 light the number of lights each night of Hanukkah. But Beis Hillel, the followers of Hillel, said no, you increase the number of lights each night. You start with 1 candle, and then when there are 7 nights remaining, you have 2 candles, and then 3 and 4 and 5. And we're all familiar with that that's the way we observe Hanukkah today. We increase the number of lights each night. Why? So Beis Shammai, who are saying we decrease the number each night, their reasoning was that the lights of Hanukkah should be like the bull sacrifices of Sukkot. Sukkot is interesting. Sukkot, which we observe in the fall at the end of the holiday season, which begins with Rosh Hashanah, it's this holiday where we spend, a week living in booths outside our house, reminiscent of when we lived in tents in the desert. During the Sukkot holiday, this is actually the most universal of holidays, we bring offerings, 70 bulls, over the course of the days of Sukkot. And we start by offering 13 bulls on the first day. And these offerings are on behalf of all of humanity. That's why it's called the universal holiday. The idea that my house, the temple in Jerusalem, will be a house of prayer for all peoples, right? And they would sacrifice 13 bulls on the first day, 12 on the second, 11 on the third, etc., diminishing the number of bulls each day as taught in the Torah. So it was a good reason, a good model for having this, symbolic offering, to publicize miracles for the whole world. But the followers of Hillel, Beis Hillel, say, no, because in matters of holiness, we do not go down, we only go up. Since these lights are holy, we don't want to have less light on the second night than we did on the first night. And so because in matters of holiness, we always ascend rather than descend, we increase the number of lights each night over the course of Hanukkah. And of course, that is the law, that is the custom that we follow today. Some people will only light one Hanukkah for the household. Many will light one Hanukkah, one Hanukkah menorah for each person in the household, right? So by the last night, they've got, let's say a family of 4, they've got 4 menorahs going, each with 8 lights of Hanukkah, right? That's 32 lights. Plus each menorah is going to have its utility candle, which is simply used to light the other candles. Since we can't make use of the Hanukkah lights, we couldn't use one to light the others. That's the utility candle. And so by the end, they've got the 4 utility candles and 32 lights going. It's a whole lot of light. A lot of people do it that way. A lot of people who never step in a synagogue all year will light the Hanukkah candles. And when they do, and when they increase each night, they are mehadrin min ha-mehadrin, the most meticulous of the meticulous Jews. That's what I have for us on Hanukkah. And then the last thing about Hanukkah actually is that one other custom that's important to note is that you're doing it to publicize the miracle. So ideally, you would do it in the entrance of your home, but outside, right? Like in the entrance, but visible to the outside, so that people can see it as they walk by. In fact, if you're ever in the old city of Jerusalem, you'll see that beside people's doors, they have like a nice, many of the ancient houses have a nook in the stone wall beside the door. And in that nook, they will put the Hanukkah lights come Hanukkah. It's okay to do it in a window. Ideally, you're going to do it within 10 hand breadths of the ground, right? So like at about the height of a table, which you could place in the window, and people could see it as they pass by. Somebody who's on the second floor, it's actually higher than it should be because people don't tend to look up when they're walking down the street to see the lights. But if you live on the second floor, you don't have the option to do it on the first floor. And so, of course, you fulfill your obligation by putting it in the window of your second floor or higher dwelling. In a time of danger, God forbid, you live in Nazi Germany or Inquisition Spain, or any of the innumerable places where Jews have been persecuted over the centuries, and it is dangerous for you to announce that you are an observant Jew who's lighting the Hanukkah lamps, the Hanukkah lights, so then you don't have to do it outside or in the window. You fulfill your obligation by doing it inside where it is safe. As always, the principle of pikuach nefesh applies. Preservation of life above all things. That's what I've got for us today. I'm going to just take a look at the comments. See if there's any questions here. Not seeing any. Let me know if there is something. People are enjoying the hat. If you're tuning in late, take an opportunity. You can write in the comments to say thank you to the grocery workers of your city. They, right now, are in the front lines of a war. They're serving. We should thank them for their service so that we can get the food that we need to eat when we're hunkered down in our homes. And we should all be hunkered down in our homes. It's the only way right now to flatten that curve, to protect the vulnerable members of our society. Take it seriously. There's enough reports out there from what's going on in the emergency rooms where it's bad and it's going to get worse, much worse, because that curve is still way too steep of new cases in America. What we're hoping is that the actual cases, which is much higher, since people aren't getting tested unless they have symptoms, nevertheless, we hope that the actual case number, which is higher, but that curve is flattening out because we're all doing a good job of staying home. Please, my friends, stay home. Stay home. Okay. Are there any questions added here? I'm not seeing that. Okay, very good. My friends, I'm sending you big love from LA, encouraging you to stay safe. Please, my friends, stay safe, stay home, and watch the video that we shared on our page today about how to rinse off groceries and other objects when you get them home from the store. It's not so simple. It's worth watching the video. It's not very long. It's a medical care worker explaining how to clean your products when you get them home. Please watch that video. It's on Accidental Talmudist. Sending you all big love. Take care.